ほら、ルフィ、今一緒に海賊になる仲間を探してるんだ。
Hello guys, welcome to my channel The Wandering Zoro, your go-to destination for anime-related content. And if you're new here, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss out on our latest videos. In today's video, we're going to be diving into part 10 of the series, so be sure to stick around until the end, and let's get started. Izuku and Aizawa got out of the car and began to walk to the entrance of the hospital where Eri had been staying for the past month. The two didn't speak the whole time from leaving the school to arriving at the hospital, and Izuku was happy to keep it that way. It didn't take long to make their way to her room. They found Eri finishing dressing with the help of an old nurse with a kind smile. Her eyes lit up at seeing Izuku, but became wary at seeing Aizawa's disheveled appearance. Izuku smirked at that and waited for her to finish up. Ready to go? The nurse asked with a gentle smile once she finished. Eri nodded at the nurse and turned to Izuku. He smiled down at her and asked, "Got everything?" She was about to nod again, but stopped and shook her head and pointed at Izuku's jacket that still was hung up where he had left it. "Your jacket?" "Of course." Izuku laughed a bit and took his jacket for the coat stand. He slipped it on and held out a hand to Eri. "Now we're ready." Eri took his hand, and they headed down to the waiting car. The little girl looked around at the new environment, but stuck close to Izuku and clung to his hand tightly. He smiled reassuringly down to her and helped her get into the car's back seat. He sat beside her as Aizawa started up the car and began to make his way back to the school. "Where are we going?" Eri asked in a soft voice. "We are going to go to a school where he works." He pointed at Aizawa. "And where I go to learn how to be a hero," he explained. "Is that where I'll stay?" "Yep. You'll have a room next to his, and I'll live in the same building as you. The rest of my class is staying there too." "Your friends that came with you?" she asked with just a bit of eagerness slipping through. "That's right, we'll all be nearby." Izuku smiled at the emotion that she showed. "Is everyone in your class nice like them?" Izuku's smile didn't slip, but he paused for a second. "None of them will ever hurt you, I promise." He patted her head. "Okay." Eri thought up another question. "What will I do?" She looked up at him in question. Izuku hummed in thought. "Lots of things. You will go to school and learn about things like reading, writing, math, and other stuff. You can learn a hobby like drawing or anything you like. And later we'll teach you how to use your quirk." Eri showed fear in the last part of Izuku's explanation. "But it's dangerous and bad." Izuku stroked her hair gently to calm her down like he had done many times before while visiting her at the hospital. "There is no such thing as bad quirks, only people who use them for bad things, and you are not bad." He made sure she heard his words and continued when he saw her listening. "Think of a person with a quirk that made them super strong. That person could help another person lift something heavy so they could get to safety, or the same person could use it to hurt people." Eri listened attentively to his words and relaxed under his hands brushing her hair. She stiffened at his next words. "Overhaul is an evil man who did evil things, and I'm glad he will never hurt anyone again. But his quirk could have helped so many people. The quirk is not bad, only the person. And I'll help you learn how to use your quirk so you'll never have to worry about it again." He smiled gently down at her and put his hand over her shoulder to pull her in for a hug. She nodded tentatively, and they rode back to school in a comfortable silence. It wasn't long before they drove through the security gate and stopped inside the UA walls. Eri looked around at the big building they stopped at, and then at Izuku, who was smiling down at her curiosity. "Is that the school?" Eri asked as they began to walk to the entrance. "No, that's the dorms. Where we live, and you will too." They were about to open the doors, but stopped Aizawa from doing so when he remembered something. "Aizawa, wait a second." Eraserhead turned around and gave him a questioning look. "Tokoyami." That is all that Izuku said, and let him figure it out from there. "Who's that?" Eri asked, confused at their pause. Izuku knelt to talk to her eye to eye. "You know how there are quirks that change people's appearances. Some have tools that are part of their bodies like hammers or tape. And then some people with animal quirks like cows, frogs, and birds." He paused to make sure she understood so far. Eri nodded, and he continued. "Well, there is one boy in our class, our dorm, who has a bird mutation. His head looks like a bird's head." Izuku saw the connection between the unknown boy and Overhaul's mask. He could see the mounting trepidation. "But he's here?" Izuku nodded. "He's learning to become a hero like me." He's a good guy that looks like one of the bad guys. When you grow up, you'll see lots of people like that. They look scary but aren't bad. Eri paused to understand what he was saying and nodded. Okay. Izuku smiled brilliantly at her and stood back up to Aizawa, who was looking at him with an unreadable expression. His smile dropped at seeing him. We're ready, he said clipped. Aizawa didn't scowl back or make a face, but instead turned around and opened the dorm doors to the common room. The sound of chatter stopped and most of the class looked over to the open doors. The class spotted the three figures and were momentarily confused since any time Izuku and Aizawa got near each other there would always be friction, but the little girl between the two was enough buffer to stop the sparks from flying. The next thing they noticed was the child between them. A few of them recognized the girl and smiled brilliantly at seeing her. Eri, you're here. Mina was the first to speak. She threw herself over the back of the couch toward the little girl and landed near her to greet her. I'm so happy to see you out of that place. Mina beamed at her. Hi, Mina. Eri greeted Izuku's energetic friend. The rest of Izuku's gang quickly circled the little girl with Uraraka and Tsu also nearby with smiles. The rest of the class began to get close, and Eri began to tighten her grip on Izuku's hand at seeing so many people focused on her. Izuku noticed immediately, and everything stopped making noise for a second to make everyone pause. Should I explain the situation? Izuku snarked to Aizawa. The man glared at the boy and turned back to the class. This is Eri. She will be staying with us for the foreseeable future. She'll have a room connected to mine, but you'll see her often. I do not have to remind you to comport yourselves appropriately around a child. He glared at the class to get his point across without having to say anything else. After a moment of quiet, Yaoruzo asked, May we ask why she will be staying at UA? She asked politely, and many others nodded. She was rescued recently from a villain organization, and we deemed it a good idea to keep her here while also helping her get her quirk under control. Aizawa drawled. Midoriya and I will be the ones near her most of the time in case we need to neutralize her quirk. What is it? Sato raised his hand to ask. Rewinding of organic matter, Izuku said before Aizawa spoke. If you see her glow, don't touch her. Izuku smiled down at her to reassure her and patted her head softly. Yaoruzo mumbled something to herself and was lost in thought. She looked up after a moment. She can reverse the aging of organic matter? She asked incredulously. Extremely quickly. Maybe when she gets more practice, it will be more controlled. Izuku nodded along. Is it appropriate for a first year to take care of a child? Ida spoke out. I've taken care of my siblings when I was even younger. Tsu shot. Back in defense of her green-haired classmate. She had seen how he had looked after the girl while they visited the hospital, and she was sure he would be good for Eri. Izuku ignored Ida and crouched down to Eri's level. Want to see your room? He asked with a smile. Eri nodded, and they parted from the class and followed Aizawa to his room. It was on the ground level of the dorms. Aizawa opened it, and Izuku guided Eri in while looking around at the apartment with a private kitchen and all the other necessities for living. It was well organized with a comfortable-looking couch in the living room and a TV next to it. The kitchen was well stocked with fresh fruits and other foods for a child to eat. Aizawa motioned to the door to the side and where Eri's room was. Izuku opened the room. He glanced around quickly and took it in before letting Eri go in and explore her new room. He smiled warmly at seeing her look around her room. She peeked in the closet and through each drawer to see new clothes in every place. Have you taken care of children before? Aizawa asked to Izuku's side by the doorway of Eri's room. Never. Parents didn't like the idea of a quirkless teen to look after their child, Izuku said with a dead tone to his voice. Aizawa watched him for a moment before asking. Then how is it you know how to look after her? Izuku raised a brow at his question. You explain things for her to understand, and make sure she knows things like Tokoyami being who he is ahead of time. Izuku hummed incomprehensive at what his question was. You're asking how I know how to look after a child. Izuku caught the nod from the corner of his eye while he kept watching over Eri. For me it's simple. Give her everything I didn't. Aizawa didn't respond for a long time, while also watching Eri look around her room. I see. Eri approached Izuku, and he smiled down at her. You like your room? Eri nodded and asked. Is this all for me? The two men nodded. Oh, okay. What's wrong? Izuku asked softly. Eri paused to get her words in order. It's a lot. Izuku nodded. It can be. It's a big change from what was before to now, but it's better, no? Eri nodded slowly, and then looked at Izuku. Where's your room? I'll show you. He smiled brilliantly and held out a hand to her. She took it, and the two left Izawa behind. Izuku showed her how to use the elevator to find the right floor and showed her which room was his. He opened the door of his room and welcomed her in. She walked in tentatively and looked around at the plain room with a few drawings hung up of Toru with their friends together, or just Izuku and her. Now you know if you need anything you can come to my room if you like. If that's in the middle of the night, then come in the middle of the night, alright? I don't want to wake you, Eri said softly. It's fine. I can be awake for longer than others could. He had experimented with the stamina energy he had taken from the Yakuza raid, and it turned out very useful. The only downside of using stamina to stay awake was that his mind became slower after longer periods. Okay. Eri accepted his offer, and then her stomach growled. She blushed slightly. Izuku laughed softly and went to the door. Let's go eat. I'm sure I can find something good to cook up for you. Izuku held out a hand for her, and they walked downstairs to the kitchen. The absorber helped Eri up on a chair on the counter. Izuku rounded the counter to the fridge to look at what he had to work with and turned around to ask her what she would like to eat. Instead of just Eri, he found his friends seated around her waiting eagerly for him. So what are you cooking for us? Mina asked, seated next to Eri with an arm around the girl and a hug. I'm partial to a burger with fries. Dinky voted. You'll get what you're severed. Izuku glared at the two. What would you like to eat? He asked more kindly to Eri. Eri looked unsure. She had never had an option to choose what she wanted to eat. The gang picked up on this and gave her some options from what Izuku told them what he had the ingredients for. They ended up cooking up a simple pasta for the girl with Toru helping him at the stove with the pasta sauce. Mina giggled quietly at the scene of the two cooking for the girl, but didn't say anything, but the look Kyuka gave her made it obvious what she was thinking. Eri devoured her plate of pasta, and they gave her another one when she finished. The gang chatted quietly around Eri as they ate comfortably. The child listened to them talk, but was content to be left out of it with Kyuka being in the same boat as the girl. When everyone finished eating and cleaning the plates, they moved to Izuku's room to play a few board games and teach Eri how to play. Everyone was patient with Eri as she learned how to play, but everyone was having fun. The next day brought Izuku to the field with Eri and Izawa. Eri had a miniature UA gym uniform, which Izuku found adorable. The three were near a few bushes they were going to use as target practice. Alright, you ready, Eri? Izuku asked to her side. Eri looked extremely nervous at the prospect of using her quirk for the first time voluntarily. Are you sure? Yep. I can be near you any time, and if you can't turn it off then Izawa will do that for you. See. Izuku held out a hand with a void covering it, and it disappeared after Izawa got the message to use his quirk on him. He can shut quirks off, and I can absorb your energy, so we'll all be safe. He smiled reassuringly at her. Okay. Eri agreed with his logic. For now, just focus on turning on and off your quirk. We can work on control later. Izawa spoke. Eri nodded and walked closer to the bush. She closed her eyes and scrunched up her face. After a long moment, nothing happened. I can't, I'm sorry. She looked down ashamed. It's fine. We are practicing. Just because you can't do it right away doesn't mean you can't do it later. Izuku reassured her. Let's try something else, visualization. What? Eri asked, confused. Imaging your quirk as something you can understand. For my quirk, I imagine I have lots of big containers that can hold the energy I want, and at the bottom of each container is a big opening for me to let out each energy I want. Izuku explained by slowly draining away the light in his hand, and in the other, a light became brighter and brighter. What should I imagine? Eri asked, getting the concept Izuku was telling her. I think for your quirk, it should be a container like mine that fills up slowly with a hose at the bottom. The hose at the bottom will release the energy you have. Why that? Eri asked, curious. Because you have something called a stockpile quirk. It's a quirk that fills up, and then you can use it when you have enough energy. Some quirks are like switches that can be turned on and off, like his. He pointed at Izawa, who was listening attentively to him. Some quirks, like yours, need to build up energy to use them. And when you run out, you can't use it until later. How do you know that Eri has a stockpile quirk? Izawa asked Izuku. I can sense energies and more detailed if I already absorbed that energy. I sense Eri's quirk energy slowly filling up every time I visit her. From what? No clue. Izuku shrugged. Quirk energy is weird from what I've learned. Okay, try it out, Eri. Izawa prompted the girl. Just imagine a big container holding your energy and open the hose at the bottom. Izuku encouraged. Eri focused and repeated the word open over and over until she began to glow and the grass under her began to regress into the ground. She opened her eyes and looked frightened for a moment before seeing Izuku's beaming smile. I did it, Eri said. You did. Izuku threw his hands up in celebration. Now let's try to close the hose, Izuku instructed gently. Eri nodded and closed her eyes again to try and cut off her quirk. She continued to glow without change. Slowly the glow diminished, but some remained coming off of her. I can't do it. But you did. You just have a little left to close. Try once again. Izuku encouraged. She closed her eyes and pursed her lips in concentration, but slumped in defeat. I can't. Tears cropping up at the corners of her eyes. It's all right. You'll get it next time. Izuku patted her head without her quirk affecting him. Her quirk suddenly cut off, and Eri looked up to see Aizawa's red eye on hers before he blinked, and they were back to normal. Next time, Izuku said encouragingly. Izuku's routine stayed the same for the most part for the coming month. He would wake up, get ready for school, train, pick up Eri from Nizu, and once a week they would help Eri gain control of her quirk. He of course did play games with the child when he had a chance. His friends would join in more than not at goofing off with the Eri. Usually, it would be board games with Eri learning how to play as they went along. Bit by bit, Eri began to relax in the new environment of the dorms. One day while Izuku was floating in the backyard with Eri at his side, Aizawa came to check on them. His homeroom teacher was kind to Eri, but was more of a guardian than a parental figure to her. When she needed something, he would do his best to help. For Izuku, that was acceptable in her circumstances. It would be odd if he suddenly became fatherly to a child they had rescued somewhat recently. He was sure he had rescued plenty of other children without getting attached. It would become difficult to be a hero if every time he did save a kid, he would become fixated on them. That was something Izuku learned from his observation. When he saved a kid's life, he couldn't take them in as he had done with Eri. It would be unreasonable and unfeasible. He would have to come to accept that. Hi, Mr. Aizawa. Want to join? Eri lowered her book and asked him while floating next to Izuku. Her hair was tied into a braid thanks to Mina and Tsuyu, otherwise it would be a mess with it all loose in low gravity. Aizawa's lips quirked up a fraction, but shook his head. No, thank you, Eri. I came to talk to Midoriya for a moment. He nodded to Izuku, who was watching him. Eri nodded, and Izuku set her down gently on her feet. Go on and ask Denki to make you a snack. Izuku patted her head gently and smiled down at her. Eri nodded and darted off into the kitchen in search of the electric-type user to make her food. Izuku smirked at seeing her run off, but his smile dropped as he turned to Aizawa, who was watching him carefully. You wish to talk? Izuku began. He nodded after a moment. How has she been doing outside of classes? The absorber thought for a moment and shrugged. As well as you can imagine. She's adjusting well enough given her circumstances. She's getting used to being allowed to ask questions and other things she wasn't allowed to do before. Aizawa took in his student's words and nodded. He paused for a moment before speaking. The school festival is coming up. He said it in a too casual way and grimaced slightly. Izuku stared at the man for a long second. Nizu told you to play nice, didn't he? He couldn't see any other reason for the hero to give him a heads up about an upcoming event. The same hero who was renounced for his logical ruse that caused so much grief in the past years. Aizawa didn't answer right away, but finally nodded. Why? Izuku asked. The principal's mind is on a different level compared to us. Along stopped trying to figure out his thought process. Izuku could think up a few reasons why Nizu would ask or order Aizawa to become more amenable. First and foremost would be so Izuku wouldn't become a threat to UA or Japan as a whole. He was very aware of the kind of devastation he could cause if he gave in to his darkest thoughts. Second, Nizu wants him as an ally he can call upon when needed. That would be an added benefit with reason one. Third, Nizu thinks Izuku could be a big enough power to stop an unknown enemy of Nizu. The League of Villains was still out there, and so were all for one's old subordinates. Fourth, Nizu wanted to develop a friendship with Izuku. He discarded the last idea with a snort. Instead of telling Aizawa his thoughts on Nizu's reasoning, he let it be for the time being. Was there anything else you wanted to discuss? That was all. Izuku nodded and headed inside to see how Eri was doing and what Denki made for her. While he did trust Denki to keep her safe, his dietary habits are worrisome. When he walked in, he had nothing to worry about since Kyuka took over for Denki when she saw him begin to pull ice cream and chocolate syrup from the fridge. Kyuka instead neatly sliced up an apple for Eri, who patiently waited at the counter. Izuku joined her in waiting in one of the chairs. When she looked over to see who sat next to her, he smiled warmly in greeting. The rest of Sunday night passed without much fanfare or incidents. The next morning, Izuku and Toru walked hand in hand to class. The other gang members walked around them, chatting animatedly between each other. Uraraka and Tsuyu were near their group. The two had become closer to Izuku's group since the raid on the Hasaikai compound, and more especially with Uraraka coming to Izuku for help with the new facet of her quirk he had shown her. He had also helped Tsuyu with her quirk, but to a lesser degree than Uraraka's. It's more difficult to help with animalistic quirks than an emitter quirk that Izuku could see easily. He did mention that there were a variety of tree frogs that she could adapt to, but it would be a long shot. After all, poison dart frogs are adjacent to tree frogs. Once everyone was seated in the classroom and the bell rang, Aizawa walked through the door as tired as ever. Listen up, the school festival is coming up. So, prepare an event or whatever. With that, he wandered to his desk and slipped under it for sleep. Yaoruzo and Ida stood up to begin their duties as class representatives. They weren't very effective at the beginning when there was excited chatter amongst the whole class. Izuku stayed out of it for the most part since he never had any interest in the festival in middle school. What do you think, Zu? Toru asked him. She had gathered near his desk with the others in their friend group. Izuku held his hands up and shrugged. I was never interested in the school festival before. Right. That would make sense. Denki nodded as he remembered what their leader had told them about his less than enjoyable past. Come on. I say dance off. Mina proposed again, with Izuku paying attention. How many of us know how to dance? I don't. Hanta raised his hand, and so did Izuku. All right. We'll be taking ideas and see what sticks. Yaoruzo got everyone's attention. She had chalk in hand and was ready to write on the blackboard. Who's got an idea? Mina. Dance competition. Yaoruzo began to write on the board as the class shouted out ideas, with a few being shot down immediately. Maid cafe, Denki shouted, and was properly slapped on the back of his head. Izuku, back me up here. He looked to his leader for support on either the idea or being abused by the girls. Izuku's eyes went blank for a moment in the imagination of seeing Toru and such. A maid outfit. Before his face could get any color in it, he shrouded himself in darkness to hide his face. No maid cafe. His jealous mind brought up the idea of Toru being eyed by others, and he didn't like it. No maid cafe. The boss has spoken. Hanta nodded along with him, but he didn't hide a smirk at Izuku's obvious reasoning for hiding his face. Ida scoffed at them as Yaoruzo continued to take ideas from the class until the bell rang and the next class began. The day continued as normal until lunch, when the gang sat together. Mina was the first to bring up Izuku's reaction during class. So, Izuku, Mina pronounced his name one syllable at a time and bumped shoulders with his. What did you shoot down the maid cafe? Didn't you want to see Toru in a maid outfit? She teased. Izuku had begun to get accustomed to the energetic pink girl's teasing, but her mention of Toru in a maid outfit did make him hide his face in the void of his quirk. He still felt his face heat up at the mere idea of Toru in such a dress. There. He did it again. Mina pointed at Izuku's face, which was covered in the darkest black. Toru slapped Mina's hand down. Leave him alone. Izuku, you don't have to answer that. Just tell me later. She leaned into him and gave him a wink only he could see. I just don't like the idea of people leering at my friends. The festival is something that is supposed to be fun, not that. Izuku waved his hand in an attempt at an explanation. The boss is a good boss, Hanta stated as he ate his food. So what do you guys think we should do then? Kyuka asked the table. Denki pointed at her with his chopsticks. You know music, we could do a concert. I'm sure others know an instrument. Kyuka's ears burned slightly at the idea. That's an amazing idea. Mina said over Kyuka, trying to get her head in order. She finally managed to do so and shook her head. She raised her hands in surrender. I'm not good enough for that. Of course you are. We all have heard you play, and it's incredible. Izuku said, dropping the mask of void to show his earnestness. Kyuka still looked unsure. I will think about it, she said, focusing on her lunch. The rest of the gang nodded at her consideration. They weren't the type to push. What else could we do? Haunted house. Mina proposed. Oh, and the boss man could make the whole room pitch black, and they had to find their way blind. Hanta said with interest in the idea, adding it to the list. Toru nodded and picked at Izuku's tray of food. Izuku is used to her trying and steal his food away. He thinks it stems from her quirk and usually never being able to be seen. He makes a small dome of shield energy to ward her off. She pinched his side, and he relented easily. Instead of trying to take his food, she tried to feed him. With a blush at the eyes of his friends watching with amusement, he took the bite. The end of lunch came, and everyone went back to class to finish off the day. Hero studies just started, and everyone grabbed their cases to suit up, but Aizawa raised his hand before they could leave. Izuku let out a long sigh when Eraserhead's eyes landed on him. Nizu wanted to talk about whatever. Aizawa motioned in the general direction of his office. Izuku didn't say anything and took his case with him to talk to the Chimera. He gave reassuring nods to his friends and walked out of the classroom. He didn't bother imagining what the principal wanted to speak about. As a hero, Principal Nezu is one of the greatest simply because of his mind. But his motives have always been hidden away lest someone try to thwart them. He is the type of person who takes care of his own first, including himself. That isn't a selfish ideal, but a reasonable one, and Izuku could support it. However, his view of the hero was skewed when he accepted Bakugo into the hero program. Now that the idea of him being in the same classroom as Izuku again has settled in, he can think more rationally. He could see a few reasons why Nizu accepted Bakugo into his school even after all the hassle that surely came from that. The first reason was that whoever worked for the lawyers of Bakugo was powerful enough to grant whatever Nizu wanted, and the appeal was too great to allow it to pass. Izuku could think up a few groups that had that kind of power, and none of them were good. The next reason would have to be that Nizu didn't want Bakugo released into the streets after his time in jail and become a villain. It would be reasonable to think he would become one since many villain stories are much too similar to Bakugo's. Nizu didn't want a villain who was a walking nitroglycerin factory with anger issues roaming Japan. The last reason Izuku could think up was that Nizu had a soft heart, but Izuku didn't think so. Maybe Nizu was the type to give out second chances, but Bakugo had more than enough chances to be better. It didn't matter if Bakugo took one step out of line. He would take care of it personally. He had the power to do so now. Arriving at the door to the principal's office, he knocked, and the door swung open without him having to touch it. "Welcome. I'm so glad to have you join me. Come in." Nizu greeted happily while beginning to pour tea. Izuku walked in after sensing the rest of the room. No one else was inside but Nizu. Eraserhead said you wanted to speak. Nothing so official, just a chat between like-minded individuals, is all. Nizu pushed the tray of tea and treats to the couches and jumped up onto one. Izuku went along with whatever Nizu had planned and set his suitcase down next to the couch. He took one cup of tea and took a sip while waiting for Nizu to begin. He had to admit the tea Nizu served was great. "What do you think of One for All?" Nizu began. Izuku raised his eyebrow at the blunt question. "Many things. What in particular are you asking?" He had thought about the idea of a quirk that could be passed on like a relay racer. "I don't have much information about the quirk itself, so I am limited." All he knew was it could be transferred, and it was a strength enhancement with a quirk boost to boot. Nizu nodded and took a bite of biscuit as he thought for a moment. "Yes, some more information would be good," Nizu said slowly and began to tell Izuku about the story of two brothers in the dawn of quirks. Izuku listened attentively to the story and was fascinated by the idea of such a quirk being handed around to defeat such an evil until it became strong enough to beat the source where the quirk was created. Izuku was quiet for a moment after Nizu finished the story. He had a few things to process. Most importantly, why would Nizu tell him this? Why? Izuku asked plainly. Nizu didn't need any more words to know what Izuku was asking. Because Mirio is dying from old age at an accelerated rate, and you already know about the quirk. What's a bit more information at this point? Izuku recalled the blonde hair turning gray at the roots. Mirio is dying, he repeated. While he didn't care for the upperclassmen, it was saddening to hear such a bright young man being snuffed out at a young age. From old age? Izuku furrowed his brows at the key point. Yes, Recovery Girl looked over him, and his cells were degenerating at an impossible speed to help him, Nizu explained. Izuku was quiet for a long moment as he thought about the issue. It's a stockpile quirk, like Ares, but what does it stockpile? Nizu shook his head and raised his paws in a sign of "I don't know" before lowering them. At first I thought it was life force. The quirk slowly began to draw out life force from the user in its infancy, and now that it's grown stronger. The quirk would have drawn more, But if that was the case, then using the quirk would slow the effect. Izuku finished. Exactly. Recovery Girl did just so. Mirio kept the quirk active as she tested some of his cells, and they continued to degenerate on his body. Niza finished. Izuku hummed in thought and absent-mindedly took another sip of tea. Okay, the quirk stockpiles energy. From what? Izuku shook his head and moved past it. That's for later. Why is the quirk killing Mirio? When did he take the quirk? Nizu answered immediately. Just before the school year began. Almost a year. Izuku filed that for later. How many users have there been before, and for how long have they had it each? Mirio is the 9th. As for how long each user held the quirk, it's hard to tell. Ms. Maverick didn't share too many details other than the base information before handing over One for All. We know Yagi Tashinori held it for over 40 years. Izuku pinched his lip and racked his mind. He furrowed his brow and asked, You ever heard of the quirk singularity theory? Nizu's eyes gleamed as he sat forward. I have. What a marvelous paper. Izuku nodded eagerly along with Nizu, but stopped himself from going on a tangent. One for All has been passed along for so long, and it's been growing for 200 years. What if it hits quirk singularity and it becomes too much for a person to handle? Why Mirio's cells are degenerating at an accelerated rate? Nizu also calmed himself for beginning to talk about theory and focused on the issue. It might explain why Mirio broke his arm when he first used it. It's become too much. Izuku raised an eyebrow at that and remembered seeing Mirio's broken arms during the raid. Using it could break his body? If he uses it at 100%, yes. He's been slowly building up to that, but he is at 10% output, otherwise he strains his body and breaks something. Nizu explained. You believe that All for One has reached quirk singularity? That's what I think, yes. More now than before, with Mirio hurting himself just to use it to its best. Maybe someone with the right quirk synergy to take the abuse of One for All, but it wouldn't stop the degenerating of cells. He sighed. One for All has become so powerful that it's breaking the user's body apart, Izuku stated. Nizu nodded. It appears it has. The two were silent for a long moment before Izuku furrowed his brows and looked at Nizu sharply. Where's Eri? Nizu was brought out of his thoughts. Oh, she is taking a nap in my room. Nizu hopped off the sofa and scurried to the bookshelf. It opened a secret room with Eri in bed with the covers over her. She woke and looked bleary-eyed at the two. She recognized the two and jumped out of bed to hug Izuku before jumping onto the couch and falling back asleep using his lap as a pillow. Izuku smiled softly down at her and brushed her hair as she snored softly. Nizu leapt back onto his couch and took his teacup. The two continued their conversation about One for All reaching quirk singularity quietly as Eri snoozed on Izuku's lap. Izuku carried Eri back to the dorms on his back. She was still drowsy from her nap earlier, and he took pity upon her and gave her a piggyback ride. She buried her face into the back of his shirt as he emanated low heat to make her feel more comfortable. Izuku's mind was back on the topic of One for All and how it could be killing Mirio. He could understand if he used it improperly, which caused his health to decline, such as breaking bones constantly while using the quirk, but if the quirk is just killing him while he holds, then there must be something they weren't seeing. His immediate solution was to hand it off to someone they could trust, and if they showed the same effects, then they had more information. Maybe it requires a person with a compatible quirk or body to keep All for One. Then he thought about Yagi Tashinori while he held the quirk. He was quirkless, and he held it for over 40 years, and he showed no symptoms that Mirio had. From what Nizu said, it was a stockpile quirk which, from what Izuku could guess, had a lot of energy built up. He almost salivated at the idea of gaining that kind of energy and experimenting with it with the others he had in his core. Maybe even enhance them like it did to Mirio's quirk. He shook his head to focus on the subject he was thinking about. The motion caused Eri to let out a large yawn, and Izuku looked over his shoulder to see her rubbing her eyes. He smiled warmly at her and continued his trek to the dorms where the rest of his friends waited. With some difficulty, he got the doors open and walked into the common room to hear his classmates discussing what they should do for the school festival. He walked to an open spot on one of the couches and squatted down for Eri to sit on. He felt her shuffle off his back and onto the couch. He turned to pat her head gently with a smile. Good nap? He asked. She let out another yawn while nodding. You're warm, she mumbled. He chuckled softly. I figured you'd like that. You hungry? He asked as he stood up. She shook her head and pulled her backpack around to open it. I have homework, she said, opening it. You need help? He sat beside her on the couch to see what Nizu had given her. I got it. All right. Let me know if you need anything. He patted her head again and stood up to join the rest of his class to see what they decided on for the festival. He walked closer just in time to hear Denki say, and with Izuku's help it will be pitch black. Mina beside him nodded emphatically. With my help? Izuku said with a raised eyebrow. Everyone turned to him. Denki and Mina immediately bolted up to him and grabbed each hand with gleaming eyes. Yes, they said in unison. No, it's still not decided. Hyuka jabbed an earlobe into Denki's arm to let a surprised Izuku go. Turu's invisible hand slapped Mina's hand away and hooked her arm with his. Mine. Haunted house isn't a bad idea. Yaoyuruzo piped in while tapping a pen on her chin in thought. I like it. See, you said next to Uraraka. My class did them when I was in middle school, and it was enjoyable. Izuku just listened as they argued about what to do for the festival. He felt comfortable with Turu's arm around his arm and thought about his past experiences with school festivals. To say the least, it was never fun. So instead of thinking about his past school, he focused on his present class arguing against Sato setting up a pastry stand since it would set on his shoulders too much. They liked the idea of a petting zoo that could have brought up, but the logistics of a variety of animals would be a mess. By the end of the discussion, they were split between three options: a haunted house and a concert. After finding out that some people could play some instruments, the idea of a concert was more feasible, but that would hinge on whether or not they wanted to play for the public. What would you like, Zu? Turu asked on his arm. He shrugged. I don't know. They both seem all right, I guess. Never been to either, so I wouldn't know really. He rubbed his shoulder subconsciously. What about you? He asked her in return. The idea of a haunted house would be pretty fun, and I'm not sure if Kyo would be comfortable with playing in front of everyone. Like you said before, it's supposed to be fun, not nerve-wracking, she said, beaming up at him. Izuku returned the smile as they put the two ideas to a vote. As Yaoyuruzo was prepared to get everyone's votes, he saw Hyuka shifting nervously. He emitted a low rhythm of sound energy. To get her attention, she perked at the sound of a simple tune and turned to him in question. He returned the questioning look and nodded to the vote. She understood what he was asking and hesitated before shaking her head subtly. All right, who wants the haunted house? Yaoyuruzo asked the class. Haunted house seems more simple to do, Izuku said casually and raised his hand. Yes. Mina cheered and followed Izuku's lead. The rest of the gang of friends went along with their leader without much thought. Hyuka let out a quiet sigh of relief when she counted more than half the class's vote for the haunted house. She smiled grateful towards Izuku, and he nodded with an understanding smile. He sure wouldn't want to be the center of attention, as she surely would have if they chose to do a concert. Before Yaoyuruzo could say anything else, Mina leapt onto her feet with a cheer. Yes, haunted house. What's the theme? Should it all be pitch black? Or just one section? What movie or show should we go off by? She asked excitedly in rapid fire. Easy there. Denki raised his hands in a placating manner. I think she should lead this project, no? He turned to the class president in question. She shrugged and stepped back. That's acceptable. Mina squealed, barely containing the excitement, and then ran off to the stairs, shouting over her shoulder as she went. I'll be right back. Not too long after, Mina's footsteps were heard over the balcony of the second floor of the dorms. Izuku looked up just in time to see Mina leap over the railing, smiling all the while, and aimed her landing on him. Mina, he shouted in concern for his friend's safety. He simultaneously pulled the gravity in her direction to slow the fall, and then as soon as she was in arm's reach, he touched her leg to absorb the kinetic moments. He glared at her as she floated over them. I knew you'd catch me, she said smugly. Gravity returned, and she fell the remaining 2 feet. Ow, my bones. She groaned and held her, but where she landed on. She let go of the few things she brought from her room and fell to the ground with her. Tokoyami picked up one book that he had in his room. H.P. Lovecraft? He asked in surprise at the book he held. Yes, that's original horror right there. With his help. She gestured to Izuku. We have advanced darkness, she said eagerly. Some of the class snorted at the reference, but continued with the rest of the things she brought. I thought we were doing a haunted house, not a house of horrors. So you asked. Potato, tomato. Mina waved off the words. It's a place we set up to scare people, whether that be ghosts or eldritch abominations. She shrugged. Of course, ghosts do have that nice appeal. I rather like the idea of this. Tokoyami tapped the book he held. That's why I brought all this. This is most of my collection of horror, so we can get some ideas of what we can do. Mina spread out the DVDs, books, and magazines. We have paranormal horror, body horror, psychological horror, Lovecraftian horror, and slasher horror. The list goes on, but I thought this should be enough. That's a lot, Yaoruzo said with raised eyebrows. She picked up one book of Japanese horror stories. She opened it and skimmed through the contents. The class looked over the contents. Some of the weaker-willed were unsettled right away from the few words or images they saw, but most of the class began to get excited at the prospect of building a haunted house. The ones who didn't like horror like Kuda and Aoyama stepped back from the contents in favor of promising to help in other ways in the future. The class was happy to let them retreat from the multiple disturbing images of the collection that Mina brought. You ever like any of this? Toru asked Izuku and motioned to the novel she was reading the back of. Never really cared for horror. I was more factual books than fiction. Izuku said, picking up one old movie of a man with a chainsaw. Some are based on true stories. Mina said excitedly. Like that one. Well, mostly. She pointed at the movie Izuku held. Some parts were taken from real events, and others were exaggerated. After the class debated what kind of haunted house they were going for, they landed on a Japanese folklore horror. It was basic, but with Mina's enthusiasm, they were sure it would turn out better. The next day, the class told Aizawa their decision, and they were provided a larger room and material for construction. The first thing was to build the layout of the path the victims would walk. They were given the week to work on the room with the rest of the school in a similar situation as they were working on their projects. The class decided on a simple winding path that had many small sections where the victims would encounter one of them dressed up. They planned to have Kuda have a few crows around the room to make noise to spook the people who walked in. Dark Shadow would be moving around the room and popping in randomly. His glowing yellow eyes would be perfect to keep people looking out of the mischievous Quirk. Yaoruzo was helping with making the costumes for the people who would be participating. Uraraka and Tsiu were the first two to volunteer to be dressed up and scare people. Toru was, of course, told to get her hero costume and mess with people as they went through the room like Dark Shadow would. As part of the class planned out who would do what and where. The rest got started on building the path the people would walk through. It was simple to build wooden archways for the path and draping cloth for the walls of the tunnel. They planned to have the path stretch the whole room until the very end where there will be an open section with Izuku making it darker than dark before the exit. But first, they were building the path. Izuku put together the wooden arch before looking for the hammer he had just set down. He frowned and looked around to see Denki had taken it and was building another one. He shrugged and turned to his arch. Instead of waiting as anyone else would, he experimentally placed his finger on the nail that was supposed to hold the wood together and applied some kinetic energy. Apparently, it was too much since instead of the nail being driven into the wood, it shot through the wood entirely and penetrated the concrete floor. He frantically waved the concrete dust away and checked on the wooden arch. The wood was fine with an added nail-sized hole. Izuku was startled by Denki poking him with the borrowed hammer. "You good?" he asked with a raised eyebrow. "Fine." He squeaked out and subtly hid the hole in the ground and the wood. He cleared his throat and asked for another nail. "I'd not lost the other one." He lied. Denki stared at his friend in suspicion, but passed him another nail from the box beside him. "Sure," he said with squinted eyes. The absorber properly drove the nail into the wooden support and set the arch to the side with the others. He continued to build the path with the others, but his eyes couldn't stop from drifting off to where the nail shot through the ground with just a bit of guilt at the accident. Bit by bit, the room was built with each day getting closer to the day of the festival. "Why do you want to scare people?" Eri asked, looking up at Izuku. "It's part of the fun of a school festival. Every class chooses something different to do, like cooking or making a play. We chose to do a haunted house, and the theme was Japanese folklore horror. It's harmless fun," Izuku said, smiling down at her, and patted her head. Eri had become close to Izuku as she stayed at UA and learned to control her quirk. It was very rare now if Eri lost control of her quirk and needed Aizawa or Izuku nearby to make sure nothing went wrong. It's been over a month since that happened, and Eri has gained good control of it. When she first arrived at UA, she had been nervous, and it made sense to Izuku. For so long she had been used as a source and experiment by the worst kind of villains. To suddenly being in a safe environment with people treating her like she should have, it's a big change for her. Before she was skittish and afraid to make anyone upset lest they punish her like back with overhaul, but now she openly asks questions and isn't afraid of being curious. While she was comfortable with almost everyone in 1A, she was most comfortable with Izuku's gang and Izuku himself. What's Japanese folklore? Eri tilted her head to the side in question. Izuku hummed in the thought of how best to explain. Back before quirks came, people believed that there were supernatural things like spirits or ghosts, and there might have been. People began to name these spirits that multiple people saw. Some were scary, and some were nice. Izuku shrugged. There's not much of that anymore with quirks being around, but there are superstitious people. That means people who believe in the supernatural. He finished his explanation and looked down to see if Eri understood some of what he had said. Eri made an O with her mouth and nodded in understanding. Are ghosts and spirits real? She looked around as if she could see one if she looked hard enough. Izuku hummed in thought. I like to think there are some things most people can't see. Seems more fun like that than just people with quirks messing around. He said, smiling. But who knows? The two made their way inside the building they were given for the haunted house and saw Izuku's classmates finishing up the last details of the tunnel and the rooms that people would have to traverse to get to the other tunnel. The small rooms they built had fake trees and bushes that they needed to move around to densely packed fake spiderwebs Yaoruzo created. The lights were on, so the path didn't seem too bad, but with Izuku's help and the lights off, it would be pitch black. They had that saved for one room where the room was a small maze, and they had to find their way through touch. Not even the brightest light would help in that lost section Izuku was in charge of. What do you think? Denki asked from above the two walking the path. He was with some others finishing the lighting for the path before the next day when the festival began. Pretty good, but I've never been in one of these, so. Izuku shrugged. Eri nodded along and shrugged with him. Denki smirked at the two in amusement. We need to get you out more, he said to Izuku. He turned back when someone called his name to help with some wiring and waved at the two as he got back to work. Later, Izuku showed Eri the section he would be in charge of. It was a small maze with traditional Japanese walls. Chains dangled from the ceiling and scattered bones lay on the ground that clattered when they shifted. The bones were made of wood, but the sound they made was perfect, as Mina put it. Hey, you guys. Mina turned from hanging some more chains on the ceiling. Yaoruzo looked at the chains with some worry. I think that's too many. I'm not sure if the ceiling would hold, and God forbid someone pulled on them. She bit at her nail and looked around for a solution. Mina waved her off and crouched down next to Eri for a hug. She had been giving the little girl as many hugs as she could when she became more comfortable around them. Eri was more than willing to return the physical contact, and Mina held on to her as she spoke. What do you think of all this? She asked the little girl. Eri looked around the room while in Mina's embrace. I dunno, seems scary. She looked at the chains and Yaoruzo, who was making support pillars for the chains hanging off the ceiling. Want to be part of it? Mina proposed. How? Mina hummed and said, we can dress you up like a spirit that could help lost people get out of our scary path. Or we can have you say scary things while people walk past you in a hidden wall. She began to plan. Say scary things? Like what? How can I be scary? Eri asked with a frown. Mina giggled. Oh, that's easy. Hearing a child's voice while in a scary place will make the scary place go from a 5 to a 10 on the scary scale. She grinned. Izuku smiled at the two as they began to plan where Eri would hide to whisper as passing victims. It was simple to make cutouts throughout the path for Eri to run around and find someone to terrorize. And Izuku had to admit that Mina was right about the idea that having a child's voice in a dark place would make things worse. Oh, that's just evil now, Hyuka said from behind them as the three who were planning Eri's lines. Come on, you gotta admit having Eri go around and ask, are you lost too? To someone passing by is too great a chance to pass up. Mina squealed in excitement at her friend. Oh no, I totally agree. It's going to be terrifying for anyone who hears her. Hyuka smirked and patted Eri's head in greeting. How's it going? I'm having fun, Eri said with a gleam in her eyes. Izuku was smiling at the child who was close to smiling herself for the first time he had seen her. What about you? What do you have planned? Izuku asked Hyuka. She shrugged. Not much. Working on the sound effects in some rooms, and we're the best place to put some small speakers. With the preparations just about done, Izuku continued walking around with Eri and showing her what they had built and how it would work. The Absorber saw Bakugo with Kirishima as the redhead talked animatedly to them more often than not quite blonde. Ever since he had apologized to Izuku, he had been keeping to himself. The only one who tried to keep the blonde social was Kirishima, but Izuku could see how it was wearing on the upbeat boy. The rest of the class had been keeping their distance from Bakugo, and most especially Izuku's ragtag group of friends he had cultivated. It made sense since they knew the full story of what he had done to Izuku. Izuku ignored Bakugo and continued with Eri. The two found Uraraka and Tsuyu in the costumes for the haunted house. They didn't have their makeup on, so their appearance didn't seem as scary as it should be. The two greeted Eri with happy smiles, and they showed off their costumes to the excited young girl. Later that night, most of the class was hanging out in the common room, Izuku's gang of friends included. The small group was seated around one of the coffee tables with a board game on it. Eri was on the couch next to Izuku napping as they played. She had lost interest in the game once too many numbers were being tossed out. Denki was sulking to the side of them. He had lost all his game money and now sat with his phone out. He perked up and turned his phone to the side to watch a video. After a few moments, he interrupted the game. "Yo, check this out. It's some villain posting online." He turned his phone to face the group. The group of friends watched the gentle criminal monologue about hero society and how ungentlemanly it was. It became even more odd as the villain left the bags of money behind and left the bank with secure guards and heroes alike subdued. "Pretty cool, right?" Denki said after the video was done. Hyuka jabbed his side with an earlobe. "You know that's a villain, right?" As Denki grumbled and rubbed his side, Izuku spoke. "Sure, but at least he's harmless by the looks of it. Give me a link to the video. I want to watch his quirk again." Toru smirked at Izuku as he pulled his phone out and opened the link sent by the electric user. "Of course, you would focus on that." She teased and bumped shoulders with him. Izuku smiled in return. It looked neat. He defended himself in a mumble as he began to watch the video. His videos have been taken down before, but he continues to open new accounts to upload, Denki explained. "To what end? Does he just want to talk while giving the law the runaround?" Hanta asked, leaning back and looking over Izuku's shoulder to watch the video as well. Mina shrugged. "Pretty weird that he left the money behind. That's weirdo behavior right there. He doesn't do it for the money, maybe for attention? Why else would he upload?" Izuku talked to himself as he replayed the video. "Who do you think is behind the camera?" Toru asked, leaning on Izuku's shoulder. "Someone pretty competent if you ask me. There's basically no camera shaking, and he's always in frame. Truly a professional." Hanta praised the unknown person for helping the villain. Denki and Mina both snorted in unison at the observation. "Nerd," Hyuka smirked at the black-haired boy. Hanta looked offended at the statement and turned to his leader. "Boss, they are making fun of me," he said in an odd accent. "Let them make fun of you. It's what you do with the information afterward that shows what kind of person are you." Izuku mumbled, not paying full attention to the conversation as he wrote in his notebook that he pulled out of nowhere. He smiled to himself and finished writing with a small flourish. "This is fun. Denki, find another villain," Izuku said, grinning happily. "See, I'm not a nerd." Hanta motioned to Izuku with both hands. "If I'm a nerd, then what's he?" He said it as if he thought he won the conversation. Hyuka snorted and shook her head. "That's completely different." "Yeah, Izuku is a nerd because he can find how a quirk works and work around it, whether it be helping or fighting against it. You, on the other hand, no cameras, nerd," Denki explained with the finishing barb sticking into Hanta. Hanta's lip quivered, and he sniffed once before looking away. "I thought we were friends." He dabbed his eyes gently with Izuku's sleeve. Izuku rolled his eyes and pulled his sleeve away from Hanta's fake tears with a smile. Mina asked the green-haired boy, "So, you profile the guy?" She asked eagerly for information. Mina was more than happy to hear gossip to sate her thirst for knowledge of people, but Izuku's ramblings were even better for her fix. Izuku smiled at having a willing audience for his so-called lectures in quirk analytics. "I think he can control the flexibility of objects in his line of sight or area of influence," he said with gleaming eyes. He flipped his phone around to continue to lecture with the video as evidence, the board game long forgotten. The next day, the school festival was in full swing with food stalls and other small kiosks serving small amenities to the families and guests at UA. It was a relaxed atmosphere with the shout of a child having fun or a family laughing as they walked down the path with pro heroes at each corner. The only few who weren't relaxed were those in Class 1A's haunted house. Two second-year general education girls clutched each other in terror, with tears threatening to ruin the minimal makeup they chose to apply that morning. This was a mistake. One girl sobbed. "We need to keep going." The other tried to pull her shaking friend along the dark path. She clutched at the electric lantern they were given at the beginning of the path and swung it around to see, but it barely illuminated anything. "The way out is ahead, quickly before you get lost like I did." The two young adults froze at the sound of the voice of a child in the near pitch-black clearing. The sensible girl swung around to find where the voice came from, but she saw nothing as her breathing quickened in fear. The sobbing girl only cried harder as her friend began to drag her even faster in desperation. "Never again," she cried, but didn't stop from practically carrying her best friend. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. This isn't fun anymore." The sobbing girl apologized to her best friend over and over again. "It has to be a fear quirk. I couldn't imagine. What is that?" The girl shrieked and pointed at the yellow, glowing eyes peeking from the fake bush. The eyes rose higher and higher as the girls screamed and clutched each other. The two began to sprint down the path without a care of what was in the way. They didn't even see the two other girls dressed up as lost spirits as they sprinted past them. They didn't until the lantern failed to light the way forward into the dark that shouldn't have been that dark. The two tentatively reached out to the wall of darkness, but pulled back quickly as their hands disappeared. Not even the lantern in the dark helped. The crying girl began to panic as the other looked around in a frenzy. Maybe there's another way. She looked at the fake walls, but there was nothing. "Don't let go of the wall and each other." The child's voice came again from somewhere. The crying girl clamped her hand around her best friend's hand after hearing the voice. "I don't want to be here anymore," she sobbed. "Little girl? What is this?" the girl with the lantern asked in a stutter. "The end of the path," she said simply, and they could hear a smile in the tone of voice. "Why is it so dark?" No answer. "Hello? Little girl? Don't let go of each other in the wall. Don't let go of each other in the wall." The crying girl repeated as the two slowly sank into the darkest of darks. The two slowly shuffled through the dark with the occasional sniff and sob from one or both of them. The once so useful lantern was now a weight that they couldn't let go of, hoping that it worked once again. They froze in their shuffling as one of them kicked something and it clattered loudly against the ground. The sound was much too familiar to the horror movies they watched together on the weekends. They didn't let go of each other as they continued to shuffle along the pitch-black path with the occasional bone being kicked accidentally. They heard the chains rattle, but they didn't feel around for them as they stayed completely silent. That was until they fell into the light. They looked around frantically and clutched each other as their eyes adjusted to the light. "Please don't forget to rate and review on your way out." They snapped their attention to a cheerfully smiling pink girl who was motioning to the exit and small desk with a few papers and pens. Mina watched the two older teens begin to sob into each other as they broke down in relief. With a frozen smile on her face, she brought the walkie-talkie to her face and spoke. I think it was too much." "What do you mean?" Yayaruzo's voice came through with a questioning tone. Mina held the button to transmit and held it so they could hear the two older teens sobbing loudly. She stopped after a moment. "They were the first ones, I think." It was quiet for a long moment, and then Kyuka asked, "Were they kids?" "Nope. I think they are second years," Denki said through the walkie-talkie. It was quiet once again as everyone with a walkie-talkie processed that. "It'll be fine, probably." Mina waved the concern off and placed the device on her hip before helping the two upperclassmen to the exit. "Don't forget to tell your friends." She waved at the two girls as they left in each other's arms. "Today is a good day." Mina nodded to herself with a smile. The day continued with excited students and people coming to 1A's haunted house after the first couple came out. The horror enthusiasts jumped at being able to experience a new haunted house to sate their horror fix. Most people were satisfied by the end of the maze, and the remaining few who weren't were very vocal about it. "This is supposed to be a fun festival." Not this," a higher-pitched voice shouted. A woman in her mid-30s with a sobbing boy at her side loudly complained to the two girls in charge of the haunted house, Yayaruzo and Mina. Yayaruzo was about to open her mouth to apologize, but Mina beat her to the punch. "Who said it was supposed to be fun? It's a haunted house. It's supposed to be scary. Sure, some people find that kind of stuff fun, but to each their own." She shrugged. The pamphlet specifically said that it wasn't for any casual passers-by. She tapped on the pamphlets they made on the table. We even made a sign. The pink girl pointed at the sign on the table with big letters saying, "Super scary." In red. We did make a sign, Yaoruzo mumbled with a nod. She was sent a glare by the woman and quickly continued. We are not responsible for each person who decides to go through. You decided to do so, and with a young child no less. While she did feel bad for the crying child, she did blame the mother for dragging them along into a haunted house. Are you calling me irresponsible? The woman said indignantly. Now you're putting words in our mouths on top of yelling unnecessarily. Mina crossed her arms and shot the mother an unamused look. The staff will hear of this. The mother said in a growl and left, dragging her crying child behind her. The few people who gathered to watch the scene parted to let her leave. Was that so wise? To antagonize her, that is? Yaoruzo asked after a moment of watching the woman go in a huff. She's one of those people who think the world will cater to their every need. Mina waved her friend's concerns away. Those are the worst to deal with. Yaoruzo nodded along. Yes, I've gathered that, but don't you worry that the staff will shut the haunted house down? She glanced at the large crowd lined up to go through the haunted house. Mina also looked around and hummed in thought. Probably not. It's too popular. The festival is supposed to be fun for everyone, and having to satisfy one to anger a mob isn't logical, as someone would say. She dropped her tone and added some gravel to mimic someone. Yaoruzo stared at her friend with pursed lips. You are picking up Midoriya's bad habit. Which one? She asked, confused. Being confrontational? No. Well, yes, but I was talking about you mocking or looking down on Mr. Izawa, Yaoruzo explained. Mina stopped in her tracks to head back to her post at the end and turned to Yaoruzo with a serious look in her eye. I am aware that Eraserhead is a great hero, but Izawa is a less than stellar teacher, especially when he always is making sure my good friend doesn't turn and kill everyone. I don't see him do that to anyone else, and I don't think that's very fair. Yaoruzo stepped back at the sudden anger Mina showed. She gathered herself and responded. Izawa doesn't do that to Midoriya. Mina cut her off before she could continue. He literally told Izuku that the only reason he wasn't expelled for the midterms was so the school could keep an eye on him. She took a step back and took in a breath before continuing. We should get back to our posts. And turned to leave. Yaoruzo was left there standing, unsure what to do next. She took in what Mina had said and tried to look at it from another angle, but if what Mina said was true, then she could see why their little group disliked Izawa so much. And that was just one incident she was told about. Only Midoriya would know how many more. She finally turned and headed to her post at the beginning of the maze to welcome more people into the haunted house. The day continued with more people coming in and checking out 1A's haunted house. It was a little past midday where 1A decided to take a break for food. Most of them gathered up and ate from the stalls other classes had set up. Izuku's gang was seated at a picnic table with Eri at their leader's side, eating a plate of fried squid. How is it, Eri? Izuku asked the little girl beside him. She swung her feet on the bench and took another bite happily. She looked up at him with a full mouth and nodded. Izuku chuckled and patted her head. Good to hear, take smaller bites. I mean, I've had better stall food. Denki complained while swallowing his bite of food. Makes sense it's not the best since a bunch of teenagers made the food. Sure, there are a few who know how to cook, but I doubt any of us know how to cook something other than cereal. Hanta explained. Everyone at the table turned to Izuku, and he noticed everyone's eyes on him. He shifted slightly in his seat. Not my fault you guys burned boiling water. Mina slammed her hands on the table and stood up indignantly. That was one time. I went to the bathroom and forgot. Kinda weird that the water blackened the pot. You sure you didn't put anything else in it? Toru asked her friend. It was just water. Mina shouted to the sky. But what kind of water? Cold water, hot water, tap water? Denki asked, and was subsequently hit in the back of the head for his question by Kyuka. Mina glared at her electric friend and took one of his skewers. I'm taking this. She used the meat and vegetable skewers like a nun would use a ruler on a disobedient student. She proceeded to take a bite and chew for a moment before looking at the skewer. You're right, it's not that good. That's when a loud laugh drew everyone's attention to a flamboyantly dressed man standing on nothing above the trees. Izuku immediately recognized him from the video Denki showed everyone. That's why he relaxed some. As far as he could tell, Gentle Criminal was a gentle criminal. He never intentionally hurt anyone other than some bumps and bruises while not even stealing property. Oh hey, it's that guy? Denki pointed. Should we do something? He looked at everyone, but most especially Izuku for guidance. Izuku looked down at Eri, who watched everything while still eating. She could sense Izuku being calm, so she was calm too. Izuku shrugged at his friends. Make sure no one gets hurt. We're at a hero school with dozens of heroes. We don't have our hero licenses, just ones to help keep people safe, he said logically. Everyone nodded and began to make sure all civilians were pushed away from the villain. Gentle Criminal, for his part, began to shout out his thoughts on hero society. Izuku kept an ear open as he carried Eri to a safe place. Izuku, is that a villain? Eri asked while being carried to the building. It is. Izuku nodded while keeping his senses locked onto the villain just in case he changed his routine and began to become a threat. He is named Gentle Criminal and wants attention for some reason. Some people are like that. Pretty harmless from what I've seen. Eri nodded along and asked, shouldn't you stop him? You're a hero. Heroes stop villains. Izuku smiled at her. Not a hero yet, just a student learning how to be a hero. But there are heroes around to deal with him, so no worries. Once far enough away from any collateral damage, Izuku sat down with Eri at his side. He pulled out a juice box for the girl and gave it to her as they watched on. More and more civilians were escorted away while heroes tried to catch Gentle Criminal as he jumped around and was an all-around nuisance. Izuku caught on that. His partner who films everything was missing and looked around to find someone with a camera. If I were to be filming, where would be the best spot? Izuku mumbled to himself. He looked up, and there was a short woman on the roof of the building with a camera. Izuku debated with himself if it was worth it to go up there and take her out, but he was reluctant to leave Eri alone. He looked around and found two guiding a small family to where the crowd was gathered behind a line of 1B students holding them back. After calling her over, he asked, could you watch Eri for a bit? He trusted to with Eri both because she had taken care of children before and she frequently visited her at the hospital while she recovered. Sure, but why? She asked bluntly. Izuku motioned to the roof with his chin. Gentle Criminal always has someone recording for him, and I found who it was. So you looked between Izuku and the unknown villain before nodding. Very well, I'll keep her safe. She patted Eri on the head. Thanks, see you. I'll be right back. Izuku smiled at the child. He absorbed the gravity around him and jumped up to the roof. He silently landed and approached the woman who was gleefully recording Gentle Criminal running around the heroes who tried to catch him while monologuing. The woman was short with a pink flamboyant outfit to match Gentle Criminal. She had a small duffel bag with her that contained a laptop with many devices Izuku couldn't put a name on. He was still wary of what kind of quirk she could have, so he watched for a moment longer before approaching her from behind. He didn't say anything and waited for Gentle Criminal to look at the camera. Gentle Criminal was laughing as he gave the runaround to a young woman flying in a dress. How is it that heroes have fallen so low? He gave a beaming smile at the camera and froze at seeing a young man behind La Brava. His partner caught the emotion on his face through the camera and began to look around, but was stopped by a hand on her head. She yelped in surprise and froze. Could you please call your association over here? She tried to pull away and run, but suddenly felt tired. Never mind, here he comes. The voice said, unhand her. Gentle yelled at Izuku in both fear and anger. She has done nothing wrong. Izuku filed that away. He doesn't want La Brava implicated in his crimes. You preach about gentlemanly behavior, but here you are ruining a festival. Seems a bit hypocritical, don't you think? Gentle ignored the rest of the heroes on the ground and landed on the roof across from La Brava and the young man. Who are you? Gentle asked. Flux, are you willing to surrender peacefully? Izuku asked with his hand still on top of La Brava's head. The young lady you have has nothing to do with me. If I surrender, will you let her go? Gentle asked with tense shoulders. That's not up to me, but I will say what I saw. Someone recording on a rooftop with multiple devices in her possession. Flux said with a shrug. Do you surrender? La Brava tried to fight, but more stamina was drained away. Gentle stepped forward at seeing La Brava move sluggishly, but restrained himself. Yes, please don't hurt her. He raised his hands in the universal sign of surrender. The next thing he knew, he was very tired. Gentle Criminal floated on the rooftop unconscious. Flux let La Brava go and grabbed Gentle so he wouldn't float away. He set the harmless villain down and stopped absorbing the gravity. He didn't have anything to tie his hands and figured anything less than a quirk suppression cuff wouldn't do anything, so he let it be. He turned back to La Brava, who was stumbling to her associate. What did you do to him? She slurred sleepily. Drained his stamina. He's unconscious, Flux said simply. He looked around and pursed his lips. Where are the heroes? They seem to be taking longer than usual. Did you have others with you? He spread his senses, but found nothing unusual. Why? Izuku turned back to La Brava kneeling over gentle criminal's unconscious form. Why what? Why did you talk him down instead of fighting like most others would? La Brava asked. Izuku shrugged, but she didn't see it. Because I do that for everyone. If they don't, then I fight, but I've asked everyone I fight to surrender peacefully. My tormentor, my opponents, villains, teachers, and even All Might. He said with a small smile at the memory of beating All Might with raw power. You'll be a good hero. La Brava mumbled. Izuku sighed. I hope so. He said to himself as the first hero arrived. Aizawa was the next one to appear as he swung up to the roof with his support gear. Had a nice nap? Izuku asked with a raised brow. What happened? Eraserhead ignored the quip and looked over the two incapacitated villains. Saw her recording, so I came up here. He came and I asked him to surrender. He did, and now we're here. He said plainly. Where's Eri? With Tsuyu. Aizawa nodded and made to take the unconscious gentle criminal. Izuku jumped off the roof and landed easily. He made his way to where he left Eri. She was still in the same spot, but now with his friends gathered around the little girl. See, told you he would. Denki pointed at Izuku. I would what? Izuku asked the group. You would leave as soon as the other heroes began to arrive at the roof, Toru said with Eri on her lap. What happened? Tsuyu asked. The woman was the assistant to Gentle Criminal. He saw me and then surrendered after I asked. Izuku summarized. What did you do to her? Hanta asked first. What's that supposed to mean? I didn't do anything to her. Izuku said somewhat indignantly. Well, why would he surrender so easily? There must have been some reason he did. Mina said. I think he didn't want her implicated in his crimes. It's one of the first things he said. That's pretty romantic, Hyuka smirked. That could be a bomb of a song too. Izuku, would you surrender if I was a hostage? Toru asked sweetly. Of course not. I would burn everything away to save you. Izuku said, crossing his arms. He has such a way with words. Mina swooned and draped herself over Hyuka dramatically. I wish I had someone that would commit war crimes to save me. The group laughed at her antics, and Izuku sat next to Toru and Eri. What's a war crime? Eri asked innocently. Nothing you have to know until you are older, Izuku said. After some time, the staff began to dispel the crowds and send them away from the festival. Since there was a villain attack, the rest of the festival was cut short. Most of the students complained but accepted the outcome of a villain infiltrating school grounds, again. Izuku was sure something would come of that. This would mark the fourth time UA was attacked if you count the press on the first week of school. Not to mention this was a harmless villain just doing it for attention. That would make UA's security look like a joke. So, this was the end of part 10 of this series. Stay tuned for next part of this series, and if you like this video, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Until next time.